Now joining us live, we've got Dan Perry, who's an international affairs expert, joining us from Tel Aviv in Israel. Dan, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's a pleasure to have you on. What more can you tell us about this latest strike on Israel?
Well, it basically is relentless, and it has been the same throughout the 3 weeks of the war. And every now and then rockets get through, and even though most are intercepted, some are not. And it's basically a Russian roulette. The casualties are very tragic, but they're not huge in number. And I think Israel can continue to withstand it for a while. But obviously, it's hugely dispiriting. A major concern is that the Iranians are targeting areas not far from the Dimona nuclear reactor. That suggests a kind of reckless escalation that could really change the nature of the war. As for Hezbollah in the north, yes, they have continued to fire rockets. Hezbollah fired rockets in the past 24 hours as well. There has been a fatality in the north, and I think the Israelis are in a state of mind where they can no longer tolerate Hezbollah, and they feel that they are aligned with the government of Lebanon, that itself is tired of Hezbollah impeding their sovereignty and controlling bits of their country and embroiling them in conflict with a powerful neighboring country. And a lot depends on behind-the-scenes maneuvers right now to see what can be done about Hezbollah, and that may include a role for Syria. There's pressure on the new authorities in Syria and President Ahmed al-Shara to actually, at the very least, seal the border with Lebanon and the areas around where Hezbollah operates still, and possibly also participate in some type of action that will have to happen in order to disarm Hezbollah. We know the government of Lebanon wants to do this. They're pretty close to banning Hezbollah as a armed militia. They have banned the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's activity in Lebanon, but they do need assistance, and it's not clear where it comes from, whether it be the Israelis or, as I say, maybe even the Syrians or some international force remains to be seen. But we're clearly at a moment when the stakes are so high and everyone's position is sort of so precarious that we could see an uncontrolled escalation.
Mm-hmm. Dan, have we crossed a red line in this war where hits on nuclear facilities and the possible environmental and health effects of those hits have now become acceptable? Have we crossed this red line?
No, I don't think it is acceptable. And I think the Israelis and Americans in their attacks on the Iranian sites believe that they're not risking radioactive fallout. They want to get hold of the enriched material, but Iran does not have active nuclear reactors that are being attacked. Basically, Israel does not admit to having nuclear weapons, but they do have a nuclear reactor in Dimona, and if that is hit, then that does risk a radiation event, and I think if the Iranians even flirt with that, then they are really playing with fire. As indeed the Iranians have been playing with fire in a variety of ways, by attacking energy installations around the Persian Gulf, blocking the Strait of Hormuz. They put Trump in a position where, even though one can never predict what Trump is going to do, you can come close to confidence in saying that he will have trouble ending the war in a situation where it looks like Iran forced his hand by blocking the Strait of Hormuz. That has to end. And that is why Trump right now is escalating and threatening to obliterate Iran's energy facilities and oil fields. They've wanted not to do this. I speak sometimes to members of the Iranian pro-democracy opposition, basically diaspora leaders, and all of them are concerned that if the Americans attack Iranian infrastructure that the Iranian people are proud of, and that the Iranian state will need in a future that is maybe democratic and peaceful, then that might help the regime. And so whatever the Americans do really needs to be messaged very publicly, very clearly, unequivocally, that this is an effort at this point to force the hand of the regime and maybe to bring down the regime. At some point, if you escalate enough, if you push people enough, then then they may go further in direct action to compel a regime change, and it may be time to talk about what is necessary in order to bring about a military coup in Iran.
Back to you, Dan. This is kind of touching on something that you were commenting on before, how attacks on infrastructure could actually have the reverse of intended effect and be a boon to the Islamic regime rather than seen as an attempt to bring them down, perhaps unite the Iranian population with the regime rather than against them. Could you just extend on that thought a bit? We talk a lot about red lines in this war, and energy infrastructure would have a massive effect on any efforts to rebuild post-conflict. Of course, Iranian hits on US infrastructure, as they have been threatening, would also have a massive effect on the global energy market. So could you just extend on your point that you were making there before?
Yeah, the Americans gambled that if the regime decapitation in the first days of the war was sufficient enough shock, what's left of the regime or the new individuals that stepped into those roles might be more acquiescent. The Iranians are not playing that game at all, and clearly they're inclined to double down and to create such disruption in energy markets and the global economy that the Americans will basically walk away. Now, I always thought it was possible for Trump to declare victory, basically, and to say within days of the original strikes, look, we've changed the regime. These are new people. We're going back to the table, and we're going to this time hope they're going to be more reasonable because we can always attack once more. Essentially, a declaration of victory that was possible at that time. Right now, with Iran having caused the damage it has done to the global economy and having crossed its own Rubicon in the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz, that's no longer so possible. So they put Trump in a very difficult position where if he tries that now, it'll be somewhat humiliating and Iran will be able to claim victory. And that is not just a game of who claims victory. And an Iranian sense of having prevailed will be hugely demoralizing to the opposition in Iran and might condemn the people of Iran to more years of misery under this oppressive regime. It's not something anyone in the West certainly wants to see. So in Iran doubling down the way it has done and threatening to even intensify attacks on energy targets around the Gulf, they're betting they can win the war. They're betting they can outlast American patience and even American power. And that the rest of NATO, for example, will continue to refuse Trump assistance. That bet may succeed, but it also might not. Many Rubicons have already been crossed. By the way, no state actor in modern history has assassinated the head of state of another country. It's unprecedented. Various instances have come close. Leaders have been killed, but Muammar Gaddafi was killed by a mob under NATO attack, but killed by a mob of Libyans. What happened with the killing of Khamenei is unprecedented. That was a Rubicon crossing. If Iran wants to cross more Rubicons, then, well, there are other thresholds that can be crossed. We talk about American refusal to contemplate boots on the ground, and the reasons to not want that are great. But eventually they might be forced to perhaps try to take over a slice of Iran near the Strait of Hormuz. That would be costly. It would be potentially the beginning of a quagmire. But if you push them hard enough, then they might cross more Rubicons. And Iran right now, actually, astoundingly, is pushing them very hard.
Now to some breaking news. In a phone call, Iranian Foreign Minister Sayed Abbas Araghchi spoke with EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas to discuss the escalating tensions in the Middle East following continued US and Israeli strikes on Iranian territory. Both sides exchanged assessments of the political, security and humanitarian impacts of these actions, emphasizing the broader consequences for regional stability. The conversation highlighted concerns about the growing risk of further escalation, with Araghchi emphasizing Tehran's position on defending its sovereignty, while Kallas stressed the EU's interest in de-escalation and maintaining international security. The dialogue reflects ongoing diplomatic efforts to prevent a wider conflict, ensure safe energy transit through the Strait of Hormuz, and mitigate humanitarian repercussions for civilian populations. Now, back to you, Dan. I just want to get your thoughts on this breaking news. There's correspondence there between the EU and Rugchi. Of course, perhaps a little bit unusual given the fact that the EU and US and Israel are quite close allies. So perhaps this could be a bit of a divergence in opinion there between these allies. What could this mean for the future development of this conflict, given that plenty of countries in the EU have sought a diplomatic resolution to this war, some saying that they won't send military resources? What's your thoughts so far?
Well, the Iranians undoubtedly are quite pleased that the Europeans and NATO in general and other American allies like Australia and Japan have categorically refused Trump's request for assistance of various kinds in attempting to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That itself may have backfired upon people who want a so-called diplomatic solution, because we see Trump then being forced to threaten Iran with obliteration of their oil fields. I struggle to envision what sort of diplomatic solution the Europeans want. They clearly are not inclined to help Trump after over a year in which Trump has been highly disrespectful towards them, indifferent about NATO, threatening to attack a NATO ally, Denmark, and taking over Greenland. I mean, Trump has behaved disgracefully towards the Europeans. So they're clearly somewhat pleased to see him twisting in the wind. But on the other hand, they must be at least somewhat conflicted, because they do not want the survival of the Islamic Republic in Iran. They do not want the Strait of Hormuz to continue to be blocked. Presumably, they would like a diplomatic solution where the Iranians agree not to enrich uranium anymore. And that may or may not be attainable. I think the Americans are at this point inclined to demand far more than that in a diplomatic solution, to include an end to the ballistic missile program, and in particular, an end to Iran's project of funding, training, arming, and guiding proxy militias all around the region, spreading chaos and jihad to Arab countries. Whether Iran might be willing to contemplate such a come down is an open question. And that might be your diplomatic solution right there. But I caution that even if they reach such a thing, well, that might be good for the region. It'll be good for the Americans, for Israel maybe, but terrible for the poor people of Iran, because it would condemn them for probably more years of life under a highly oppressive regime. So we're back to where we started, which is what can be done to compel regime change in Iran.
Mm-hmm. Where is the UK's interests in this war? Are they stressed about the energy markets and seeking a quick resolution to energy prices, or is this more about their relations with the United States?
Well, Britain had hoped that it could carve out a special relationship with the US independent of the Europeans and the various points of tension and friction between the European Union that they left a few years ago and the Americans. But Trump has not really played along. Britain did not get a free pass from Trump's trade war and tariffs on a whim that he has imposed on countries from east to west and from north to south. Keir Starmer faces very great difficulty politically. He may face a leadership challenge in coming months in the Labour Party, might not be prime minister by the summer. The Labour Party is losing by elections and cratering in the polls. And you ask about Britain's interest, I think for Sir Keir, basically, it's what is his political interest. The Labour Party is the rank and file, and also the parliamentary party are not in favor of Donald Trump. And they are no fans of how Trump has gone about this war. Trump is currently asking for help from countries that he did not consult with when he started the war. That puts everyone in a very delicate position. So we have a fundamental contradiction that applies to all of America's allies, to the European Union, to NATO, and also to Britain, even though Britain has left the European Union, they're still in NATO, which is they basically hate Trump. They want to see Trump punished for his entire way of being. But on the other hand, surely they know that the Islamic Republic of Iran is a criminal regime that is causing unfathomable harm to its own people and to the region and to a degree to the world. Their missiles can reach Europe. So that is the contradiction that they face. And we see that Starmer, even though, like the Europeans, doesn't want to enter the war and gives lip service to diplomatic solution, my sense is that Britain may be the weak link in NATO's resistance to Trump, and might, if a plausible scenario is created where they can somehow help without risking British lives, he might be amenable to it. But he's always concerned that it will further undermine his political position in his own party. He's a little bit of a lame duck before he finishes first term.
Dan, it's been fantastic to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time, and please stay safe over there in Tel Aviv.
Dan Perry, international affairs expert, is joining us all the way from Tel Aviv at this point in time. Dan, appreciate you taking out the time and speaking with us. Well, in India, we are very impressed and concerned and relieved that the Indian community has found home far away from home in Israel, like many Jewish communities and many Jewish people have found home in India. But what's worrying at this point in time is the fact that the nuclear facilities in this part of Israel are also being targeted by Iran. How concerned are you at this point in time for obviously this minuscule community that lives in Israel, as well as the larger situation at hand?
Oh, the Indian community, the Indian Jewish community in Dimona is essentially seen as part of the fabric of Israel. People came from Israel from all over the world. The vast majority of Jews, about 100 and some years ago when Zionism began, were European Jews. But there are different other communities, and in many cases, these blended in over the years with local communities and adopted the cultures and language and traditions and even appearance of these other countries. And the origins of the Indian community, I think, are largely believed to be indeed Jews that came from the land of Israel 2,000 years before, but they've become quite Indian. So as you've been relaying, quite a few thousand of them live in Dimona, and Dimona is a very interesting place. And the community in Israel has a great presence, quite impactful. There are quite numerous Indian restaurants, by the way, run by descendants of, or indeed immigrants of Jews from India that came to Israel. So that's a factor in the country. Now, Dimona, as you say, is a geopolitical flashpoint, because a few kilometers away lies the Dimona nuclear reactor. And if the Iranians really are targeting the nuclear reactor, and should they actually manage to hit the reactor or the water cooling facilities or any aspect of it that could bring about a radiation leak, that would be quite catastrophic, and it would up the ante in the war and change the nature of the war altogether and bring about probably devastating counter-reaction. So I know that the Dimona nuclear reactor is among the most protected places in Israel, and I think the chances that a rocket gets through and hits it directly and causes the kind of impact that we're sort of talking about is small, but not inconsequential. And Iran is really playing with fire if they're actually trying to target that nuclear reactor. It's almost indescribable what nature of escalation could come about, and I suppose it reflects the desperation of the regime in Iran and their sense that their survival really is at risk, and what apparently is their most unfortunate decision to double down and to quite potentially choose the Samson option of bringing down the house upon itself and everyone else.
Dan, appreciate you taking out the time and sharing that important perspective that everybody in India needed to hear. Thank you so much. All right, we take a short break on that note.